Well, welcome to Richie's Roost on a beautiful, warm day in Shaco, Mississippi. I'm delighted to be outside for a while. I got a little confession to make to you today. I started out with a plan for today's video about talking about some stuff about our country at its early founding days. And I'm going to do that here before too long because there's some things I think we ought to think about. Birth of the nation, some things that happened, maybe why some things happened. But while I was going through this stuff, I ran across a biography that I thought maybe I'd just share with you today because for some reason it just hit me as being the right time. You may agree or disagree, and of course you history buffs are going to know this anyway. But you know, I never knew much about James Madison, fourth president of the United States. He kind of took a back seat to everything, although in my opinion, and as most of you know, I value that very highly, I think he was the smartest one of the whole bunch. Jefferson, Adams, maybe even Washington. He's just a brainy person. So I thought I'd share a few of the little things with you, some of the little backstories that you may not have heard that I thought were interesting. And we'll do a quick dive into the life of James Madison. He was America's smallest president. He was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 100 pounds, soaking wet. His voice was so weak that people often had difficulty hearing his speeches. And he was plagued by recurring bouts of what he called bilious fever, what he described as a constitutional liability to sudden attacks, somewhat resembling epilepsy. Although he didn't have epilepsy, he thought it might be resembling it somewhat. Well, he was Princeton University's first graduate student, by the way. In 1869, at the age of 18, the kid left his family plantation to attend the College of New Jersey, which is now Princeton University. And he proceeded to blaze through the 4-year course in only 2 years, often sleeping just 4 hours a night, just to make time for reading law and Greek and Roman philosophy. And he was a natural scholar. He was still unsure about what he wanted to do, his career path, when he got out of college. So he took an extra year under the direction of the school's president, John Witherspoon, and studied a year of Hebrew and other subjects. And while Madison wasn't awarded an advanced degree, the university now considers him to be the original graduate student. He once lost an election because he didn't give alcohol to voters. After a stint in the Virginia Convention in 1776, he was a young Madison lost a 1777 bid for election to the state's House of Delegates. He'd later write that the defeat was the result of a refusal to provide free liquor to the voters on election day, which was a common custom, then known as swilling the planters with bumbo. Bumbo. That was a new one on me. I heard whiskey called a lot of things, but bumbo wasn't one of them. That's what he said. He said he lost it because he didn't ply him with the bumbo. But one of his opponents, who happened to be a tavern keeper, simply adhered to the old practice, and he raked in the votes. Well, despite that setback, Madison was soon to be chosen for an open seat on Virginia's Council of State. And by 1780, the 29-year-old was serving as the youngest delegate to the Continental Congress. He wrote the Constitution, and of course, the first amendments to the Constitution, the first 10 amendments we know was the Bill of Rights. He didn't think you needed those. There's one thing he had in common with John Adams. John Adams thought that the Constitution was just fine where it was and did not want to have any amendments to it whatsoever henceforth. And the only way it could be amended was by having 100% of the states vote in favor of an amendment. Well, Lord knows, how are you going to get 100% of anything by any state legislature, for heaven's sake? Or we got a million different views on a million different subjects now. So that wasn't going to work. And Thomas Jefferson was a smart one that said, things are going to change, the country's going to change, people are going to change, and we need to have the ability, while we think it's a pretty good document, we want to have the ability to change it as times require. But Madison was opposed to that too, because he thought that the language in the original Constitution explained enough about the things that were included in the Bill of Rights that the Bill of Rights was unnecessary. The language had already been included, although the language was not as direct as the Bill of Rights. So he finally acquiesced and said that he'd agree to it, but he didn't like it. But show what kind of he kind of shepherded it through. He said that he just decided that, well, everybody else is so in favor of it, I'm going to have to be in favor of it, and he was able to shepherd the Constitution then to ratification. But he didn't figure he could have done it without the Bill of Rights in there, which he opposed, which I thought was pretty good view of the man's ability to think in a rational manner. A lot of scholars don't, but he did. Now, he privately described that as a nauseous project, shepherding the Bill of Rights through the ratification process. A nauseous project. But now, if you want to talk about opposites attracting, he married a lady named Dolley, Dolley. And she helped define the role of First Lady. In contrast to Madison's quiet and retiring personality, Dolley was a social butterfly. She was known for her exuberance and warmth and wit. And when Madison began his first term as president, she embraced the role of First Lady and helped define its duties by redecorating the White House and hosting the first ever inaugural ball. She also served as a directress, if that's the right word, of an orphanage for young girls. So that she started the tradition of First Ladies taking on a public outreach project. And she proved particularly effective in her job as a White House hostess, because her weekly receptions, she had receptions weekly, and they became a hot ticket item among the foreign dignitaries and intellectuals and politicians. Leading writer, for example, I saw where the writer Washington Irving, you know who he was. He remarked on the blazing splendor of Mrs. Madison's drawing room. So she was a character and just what he needed. Lord knows what he's doing when he puts people like that together. So he was one of the only presidents to accompany troops into battle. Now, this one got my attention. The other than Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln was present at the Battle of Fort Stevens during the Civil War. Madison was the only sitting commander-in-chief, president, to be directly involved in a military engagement. And when the British forces marched on Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812, the bookish president, now get this, borrowed a pair of dueling pistols from his Treasury Secretary and set off for the American lines. He's going to join the fray. Well, have you got a picture of this? Here he rides to his troops with a pair of dueling pistols. He's going to rally the troops. Well, he and his entourage nearly blundered into some British forces. And arriving, they soon heard the whistle of enemy rockets overhead, prompting Madison to tell his cabinet secretaries that it would be proper to withdraw to a position in the rear. I expect he did. Dueling pistols are really not, they really don't come up against rockets too well. Anyway, after the American militiamen were put into a rout, and they got beat and they were heading out of there, Madison joined his troops, fleeing the city and leaving the victorious British to torch the White House and the U.S. Capitol. Madison was able to return to Washington a few days later, but the damage to the executive mansion forced him to reside in the city's Octagon House. But one of the things that Dolly did was, before the British took over, she made sure that one of the portraits of Washington was removed so that it wasn't burned up with the rest of the house. Dolly did that. Now, one of the most interesting accounts of Madison's life came courtesy of Paul Jennings. And he was a black slave who was born into bondage on Madison's plantation. But he accompanied the newly elected president to the White House as a boy and eventually spent nearly 30 years serving as Madison's manservant before purchasing his freedom in 1847. Now, he later recounted his experience in 1865 in the title, A Colored Man's Reminiscence of James Madison, which was a short book, now considered the first memoir of life in the White House. Along with a look at Madison, Jennings described as a temperate man, which means gentle, well thought out, considerate, called him a temperate man, who always dressed wholly in black and never owned more than one suit. The memoir also includes a first-hand account of the evacuation of the White House, as I said, during the War of 1812. And that was when he described that Dolly Madison got that portrait of Washington out. That's in the book. Well, Madison declined an offer to prolong his life until July the 4th, 1836. because he was sick and on his deathbed in June of 28th, and his doctor suggested that he take a, what do they call it, some type of a medicine, stimulant, really, I guess that'd be the word, the stimulant, to prolong his life until July the 4th. You know, you remember Adams and Jefferson both, and Monroe. James Monroe died on the 4th of July. James Madison and, Thomas Jefferson and Adams died within 4 hours of each other on July the 4th. But Madison declined to take the medicine, and he died on June the 28th, 6 days before the 60th anniversary of the nation's birth. And by the way, he was the last surviving signer of the Constitution. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little shot into his life. I hope you did. I enjoyed kind of perusing that thing and looking at it and pulling some of these things out that I thought you may not have seen. But he was a good man, diminutive, small, but he might have been little, but so is Adam. I'd have liked to have met him. He'd be an interesting man. Probably, as I said, the smartest one of that whole bunch, and actually the author of the Constitution. So that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll talk about some other things later that might be a little less light, but you never can tell. I might take off on another tangent. We'll see. Until then, I'm Jim Ritchie. I'll see you again next time.